One of these animals forgot how to fly. One of them forgot how to see its own food. Not bad eyesight. Cannot locate dinner unless it's floating directly above its head. One of them was bred to be worn in someone's sleeve, like a phone case, but alive. And the last one was bred to have seizures, on purpose for entertainment, thousands of years before anyone had a word for content. None of this was an accident. Every animal on this list exists because at some point in ancient history, a completely normal, functional creature crossed paths with a human who looked at it and thought, I can make this weirder. And then that human's grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren kept proving it for centuries, without ever once writing down why. We're starting with the version of that instinct that almost looks reasonable. By the end, you're going to be asking what exactly was going on in the ancient world. Let's get into it. Somewhere in China, more than 5,000 years ago, somebody was staring at a wild moth caterpillar spinning a cocoon, and they had a thought that would eventually clothe emperors. What if I just kept this? Reasonable enough. Weird parts coming. That caterpillar became the domesticated silkworm, and here's the detail nobody puts in the headline. At this point, it is not an animal that can survive in the wild. At all. Not a little rusty out there. Cannot. Picture the wild version first. Drab little moth, constantly on alert, fast enough wings to dodge a hungry bird. Now picture 4,000 generations of humans quietly picking the calmest, palest, least flighty ones to breed, over and over for 4,000 years, and watch what's left. The domesticated silkworm is heavier, paler, and this is the fun part. It still has wings. They just don't work anymore. It's got the silhouette of a flying insect, the way a mannequin has the silhouette of a guy who runs marathons. It also lost most of its eyesight, and its instinct to run from danger, because for 4,000 years straight, nothing in its world ever tried to eat it. Humans handled that part, so evolution looked at seeing and fleeing and shrugged. Why keep maintaining features nobody's testing? Here's the twist that actually makes this wild. Every other domesticated animal on Earth still has a wild cousin running around somewhere. Dogs came from wolves. Wolves are still out there. Cows came from aurochs. Recently extinct, but recently. The silkworm's wild ancestor still exists in parts of Asia, which almost feels like a taunt. But the domesticated silkworm isn't a version of it anymore. It's a completely separate creature that only continues to exist because humans keep choosing, generation after generation, to keep it alive. It can't feed itself, can't escape a predator, can't fly away from literally anything. It is an organism that fully outsourced its own survival to us. That's the calm one. That's the, kind of wild, mildly interesting entry. Good. Hold that thought, because the next one takes the exact same idea and adds a detail that sounds made up. They made the animal look like it's built out of glass. 1 in a few thousand. That's roughly how rare it originally was. Sometime around 1,000 years ago, during China's Song and later Jin dynasties, a small mud-brown wild carp, nothing special, hatched with a stray patch of gold-orange scales. Most people would have shrugged and moved on. These people did not move on. They bred it, then bred its most colorful offspring, then kept doing that without stopping for roughly 1,000 years. That's the goldfish. Every ornamental goldfish alive right now, bowls, ponds, carnival prize bags, is the tail end of one of the longest continuous breeding experiments in human history, run entirely by medieval fish hobbyists who had zero concept of genetics. They just liked pretty fish, and they had unbelievable patience. Here's where it stops being charming. Somewhere in that 1,000-year stretch, breeders realized they could go past color and start reshaping the fish's actual body. And once they realized that, they did not stop at pretty. Telescope-eye goldfish have eyeballs that grow outward, on stalks. Sometimes so far the fish physically cannot close its eyelids around them, because goldfish don't have eyelids in the first place, so there was never a safety net installed. Bubble-eye goldfish carry 2 enormous fluid-filled sacs under their eyes, sometimes bigger than the eyes themselves, which can straight up rupture if the fish bumps into something, which is a genuine everyday risk for it because this breed also has no dorsal fin, meaning it can barely steer. Sit with that combination for a second. Fragile, exposed, stalked eyeballs, bolted onto a fish that was simultaneously stripped of its ability to steer around anything solid. Somebody built that on purpose. over generations and never once thought maybe not both. And then there's the detail that quietly wins the whole entry. Some of the most extreme celestial eye goldfish have eyes that permanently face upward, toward the sky, not forward, ever. The fish can see the surface of the water perfectly. It cannot see what's directly in front of its own face, which means some goldfish alive today are functionally unable to locate their own food unless it happens to be floating directly above their head. They can't fly. Now they can barely see. Surely this is where ancient humans looked at the trajectory and pumped the brakes. They did not pump the brakes. If anything, what comes next proves the opposite, because this time they stopped reshaping bodies for looks and started reshaping an entire species around a temperature. Long before Europeans ever set foot in South America, pre-Incan cultures on the coast of what's now Peru had a very specific, very unglamorous problem: freezing desert nights and no electricity to fix it, obviously. Their solution was a dog, specifically a hairless one, what's now the Peruvian hairless dog, and its cousin the Mexican Zoloid squintly. And here's the part that sounds like folklore but is documented biology. These dogs run hot. Their average body temperature sits a few degrees above a normal dog's, closer to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and with no fur trapping any of that heat in, it just radiates straight off their skin. So people use them as heating pads, literally. You'd sleep with one curled against your stomach or your feet, and it worked about as well as a hot water bottle that also loved you unconditionally. Ancient artwork from the region, ceramic vessels, tomb figures, shows these dogs constantly, over and over, which tells you they weren't pets in the good boy sense. They were infrastructure, load-bearing infrastructure with a heartbeat. I know what you're thinking. Cute, functional, wholesome even. Here's the escalation, and it's the first genuinely dark turn on this list. These dogs weren't only bred for warmth in life. In several pre-Columbian Andean cultures, they were also used in burial rituals, sacrificed and buried alongside their owners on the belief that the dog's heat would guide or comfort the person's spirit into the next world. Archaeologists keep finding hairless dog remains deliberately placed in tombs across the region. Not once, repeatedly, across generations. This wasn't a one-off ritual. It was a stable, standing cultural system built entirely around an animal humans had engineered to run warm. Think about what actually had to happen for that dog to exist. Someone noticed hairless puppies ran a little hotter than the rest of the litter, then deliberately bred hairless dogs with hairless dogs on purpose, generation after generation, selecting for a trait that, in the wild, is a death sentence. No fur means no protection from sun, cold, or insects. A hairless wild canine does not last. Evolution had notes. Humans ignored the notes, but a hairless domestic one, kept indoors, fed, and valued specifically because it has no fur. That one thrives. Ancient breeders took a liability and made it the entire point of the animal. So far the pattern is reshape the body, reshape the senses, reshape the literal internal thermostat. Rough, but at least it made sense to the people doing it. Warmth, silk, pretty fish, understandable motives. The next one breaks that pattern completely. Because this is the first animal on the list that wasn't bred to do anything at all. It was bred purely to be looked at. And this is where a cute idea starts costing something. Imperial China well over 1,000 years ago. Somewhere inside the palace breeding programs of the Tang dynasty and beyond, someone decided the ideal dog should resemble a lion, specifically the stylized, exaggerated lions carved outside Buddhist temples. Statues. Most people in that palace had never seen a real lion in their life. So they didn't breed toward the animal, they bred toward the myth. That's the origin of the Peking guess. And the goal was never speed, or hunting instinct, or guarding livestock. The goal was silhouette. A broad, flat face, a mane-like ruff around the neck, a body small enough to be carried inside the sleeve of a royal robe. And that's not a figure of speech. These were literally called sleeve dogs. Bred down in size specifically so nobles could tuck them into their clothing like a very needy, very fashionable accessory. For a while, that's it. Small dog, slightly flat face, manageable. Then, breeding kept going for hundreds more years, generation after generation, always selecting for an even flatter face, an even more compressed skull. Because flatter kept reading as more lion-like to the people making the calls. Here's where the mental image needs to catch up with the biology. A dog's skull evolved over millions of years around a specific internal blueprint. A long nasal passage, a jaw that lines up with the roof of the mouth, airways with enough room to actually move air. Breeding for an extremely flat face doesn't delete that blueprint. It just crushes the same amount of furniture into a much smaller room. Nothing gets removed. Something just has to buckle. In the Pekingese, what buckled was breathing. The soft palate, the tissue at the back of the roof of the mouth, usually ends up too long for the shortened space it's now crammed into, so it partially blocks the airway. The nostrils are frequently pinched almost shut. The result is a dog whose resting breathing sound is a permanent, built-in snore, because it is at all times working harder than it should just to get air in and out. And this wasn't some side effect nobody clocked. Historical accounts describe court staff whose actual job was fanning Pekingese dogs during hot weather, because their crushed airways made it dangerously hard for them to cool down by panting the way a normal dog would. The imperial court didn't fix the flaw. They hired humans to manage it permanently. There's one more detail that flips this from quirky royal fashion into something colder. For long stretches of Chinese imperial history, owning one of these dogs outside the palace wasn't just discouraged. According to multiple historical accounts, it was punishable by death. This animal wasn't only bred to look a certain way, it was bred then legally locked away, specifically so no one outside the ruling class could ever have one. So by this point, ancient humans have taken a dog's entire respiratory system and physically remolded it around an aesthetic that came from statues. And then back to the decision with law. You'd think that's close to the ceiling. It is not. And it's not close, because everything up to now, the moth, the fish, the heater dog, the sleeve dog, happened to the animal's body. The last one is different. This one happened to the animal's brain. Pigeon fancying, deliberately breeding pigeons for specific traits, is one of the oldest hobbies on Earth. Egyptian and Mesopotamian records mention kept bred pigeons going back roughly 3,000 years, and the hobby basically never slowed down for the next 3 millennia. Most of that breeding produced exactly what you'd expect: color patterns, feather shapes, sharper homing instincts. Then somebody bred a pigeon that flips backward through the air mid-flight, over and over, completely uncontrollably, and thought, keep that one. They're called tumbler pigeons, or in their more extreme form, rollers. And here's the part that separates this from every dog trick you've ever seen. The flip isn't trained. You can't teach a pigeon to backflip the way you teach a dog to roll over. This is neurological. These birds carry a genetic trait that triggers something close to a brief seizure mid-flight. The bird loses muscle control for a fraction of a second and tumbles backward through open air, sometimes once, sometimes in a rapid spinning freefall of a dozen flips or more, before it regains control and flies on like nothing happened. Yeah, a pigeon, midair, having a seizure, and just carrying on with its day. Let that sit for a second. Ancient breeders had zero clue any of that was neurological. What they understood was simpler. It looks incredible from the ground. A whole flock of these birds performing synchronized backflips mid-air is genuinely a stunning thing to watch, which is exactly why the trait got selected for harder and harder generation after generation, for literally thousands of years. Free entertainment, basically. Right up through breeders that later included Charles Darwin himself, who studied tumblers directly while working out his ideas on selective breeding. Here's where incredible visual turns into something else. Because breeders didn't just preserve the trait and leave it alone, they pushed it. The exact same way Pekingese breeders kept pushing the flat face, the exact same way goldfish breeders kept pushing the eye size. More flips, longer tumbles, tighter spins, and the more extreme it got, the less it looked like a brief mid-air stumble, and the more it became a genuine flight failure. In the most extreme roller lines, some birds spin so hard and so long that they physically cannot pull out of it in time, and they hit the ground. Breeders have historical, documented terms for exactly this outcome because it happened often enough that they needed a word for it. An animal shaped by human hands across thousands of years to have a neurological event that occasionally kills it, purely because the neurological event was beautiful to watch from below. Now, here's the callback, because this is the moment the whole list snaps into focus. The silkworm lost its wings to neglect. Nobody was breeding against flight. It just stopped mattering once nothing was hunting it. The goldfish lost its eyesight as a side cost of chasing a look. The tumbler pigeon is neither of those. Nobody accidentally gave it a seizure disorder. Ancient breeders identified an involuntary neurological malfunction, recognized it as visually spectacular, and then spent thousands of years deliberately intensifying it, fully aware by the more documented periods of exactly what it was and exactly what it sometimes cost the bird. That's not a side effect anymore. That's the actual product they were selling. So here's what actually connects a flightless moth. A fish that can't see its own dinner, a dog bred to be a furnace, a dog bred to fit in a sleeve, and a bird bred to have seizures on cue. None of them were mistakes. Every single one is the result of ancient humans identifying exactly what they wanted: warmth, beauty, status, spectacle, and then patiently, deliberately, generation after generation, editing a living creature until it matched the picture in their head. No genetics textbooks, no microscopes, no concept of DNA whatsoever. Just observation, patience, and an apparently bottomless willingness to keep pushing a trait past the point most of us would call enough. Turns out, good enough was never really on the table. And maybe that's the actual takeaway. Long before humans had any scientific understanding of what they were doing, they were already doing it, reshaping other species around human wants, with a level of commitment that borders on obsessive. The tools changed. The instinct never did. Somewhere, right now, someone is still doing exactly this. The only real question left is whether, 1,000 years from now, something we're breeding today ends up on a list just like this one.